One of the topics in strength conditioning and sports that I hear often talked about is this idea of, does muscle mass really matter for the athlete? It's a simple question, but it has a complicated answer. And as usual, it depends. Depends on who we're talking about, the athlete, and how you train. Okay, so first of all, the athlete. It depends on the sport. So if you're talking about a collision sport, American football, rugby, you're going to need some mass, at least some mass, in order to be able to withstand some of the collisions that occur with the sport. And so gaining mass of any type might be beneficial. And you can't be a 220-pound offensive lineman in the NFL. You're going to get murdered. Okay, and so you have to gain mass, momentum. There's a massive portion of that. You can only increase your velocity so much. You're going to need some mass when you make these collisions in order to withstand them, to fall, all those things. So mass in general is going to be important. For sports that are more contact oriented, like basketball, soccer, where you are making contact, sometimes collisions with others, some mass is important, but maybe not as important as like American football and rugby. As you get more massive, you have to keep in mind of the equation for good old-fashioned force. Force equals mass times acceleration. Well, if you rearrange that equation, acceleration then equals a relationship between force and mass. And so the more massive you get, and if you're not becoming more forceful, your acceleration drops. And so what you're looking at now is this idea of strength to mass ratio. Getting bigger is not going to be beneficial if you're not getting bigger and also getting more forceful. So if you talk about combat sports, if you go up a weight class, that's great, but everybody else is bigger too. And if you've just gotten bigger and stronger at the same rate, then you're going to run into the same problem you did at the lower weight class, where you're a certain size and maybe not strong enough to generate many more accelerations that may be beneficial for your sport, whatever that might be, moving a bar, moving your leg, whatever it might be. So you have to figure out then, is gaining mass a good idea based on sport? Then also, what the athlete needs. Even a soccer player, you might say, well, I'm worried about strength to mass ratio, but they're so undersized, they're getting pushed around, or they're a basketball player in the paint, they're getting pushed around. You might have to compromise and say, all right, even if we increase mass and force at an equal ratio in order to maintain the acceleration we have, it might be worth it. You just have to make sure you're training in such a way to do that. You don't want to just gain body fat at that point. Even just muscle mass that isn't beneficial. And that might seem silly. Like, what are you talking about? Isn't all muscle mass beneficial? You open like a basic bio book, and it's like cross-sectional area drives force and strength. And that's true, but it's not like when it comes to mass to force generation, it's not a perfect ratio. There's a lot of factors that go into how much muscle quality there is, basically. So if you look at somebody who might be looking to just get massive like a bodybuilder, they don't really care a whole lot how strong they are. That's not the name of the game. The name of the game is gain more mass. And so the way they train is in such a way that they can repeat the volumes needed in order to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so, doing rep ranges in that mid-range, I'm going to use the old generic 8 to 12 range, 2 to fail to maybe even fail occasionally, is going to be a really good way in order to sustain continued volume over time and gain mass. But the type of mass that may be occurring may be more specific to the type 1 fibers, which may not be your force producers when it comes to moving quickly. And you may have more of what's called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Some of you probably heard of this, versus when we focus more on hypertrophy of the actual contractile proteins of the muscle. Okay, so if you're training in that mid-rep range, you're going to gain mass, going failure, near failure, 2 to fail roughly. And that's great, but again, you might be targeting the muscle fibers that are more into endurance type of work, which again, as a bodybuilder, who cares? You're getting bigger. And or you're going to be gaining more of the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is the goo of the cell. It's the supportive material of the cell. If you think about what you're doing to the body, you're suffocating it, you're making it really tired, suffocating it in the muscles, and with the muscle pump that occurs, you're creating high rep sets. That's going to require more metabolic machinery. And so that's how your body adapts. The old SAID principle here. If you lift heavy weights, you're not going to get as much hypertrophy potentially. I know there's some research that says that you will, but you won't gain as much hypertrophy over time because you can't sustain lifting higher volume, 2 to fail loads over time. So it has an issue to do with cutting down the volume. If we look at the rep ranges, it makes a heck of a lot more sense to lift heavier weights if you're trying to gain strength, because that's more of a neurological type of phenomenon. And you're learning how to move. Strength is a lot of ways a skill. You're learning how to move the weight better. And so you have to lift heavy weights. That makes it hard, though, to repeat those movements over and over and over again. So you may not get as much hypertrophy over time as much as doing a bodybuilding style, just because you can't repeat the load. Okay? And so it's more of a patient game to gain mass if you're looking at an athlete. We're not going to do a massing phase for them. We're going to do a slow gain of strength over time, both neurological and when it comes to gaining mass itself. It's going to take more time, and that's okay, because we want to see that force coming up faster than the mass that's coming up with it, and that's both neuro and the type of hypertrophy now we're going to get out of lifting heavier weights. You're going to get more of the contractile protein type of hypertrophy than you will when you get that moderate range repetitions and you get more sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, or the scaffolding of the muscle. So again, it's not an easy question. You just have to decide what you want as an athlete or what your athlete needs. If they're a soccer player and they just need straight up mass, period, they're getting pushed around, they need to get a bigger upper body, then screw it. You might just do a bodybuilding type of routines. You can gain just big mass. If you're trying to gain mass in their legs with the idea of that's going to make them run faster, then you don't want to do a bodybuilding type of thing. You'd want to do a slower, strength-focused type of mass. So in other words, just focus on getting stronger. They're going to get more massive over time. It's just going to take a longer time to do that. You don't care about that as much because it's not about collisions or contact. It's just about gaining muscle size and quality of the muscle, being more contractile proteins in that muscle per, cross-sectional area of, however we want to determine that area is in the muscle. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. It's not an easy question, or it's an easy question. It's a more complex answer, just like all these things when you're dealing with training human beings. It's not going to be a black or white issue. It's going to be it depends issue. If you need mass, train like a bodybuilder. And your pennation angles will be not very favorable for speed and all those type of things. But if you need to train for mass with the idea of strength and power over time in mind, then take a more of a slow approach and train more in the strength range. We're talking about repetitions under 6. It's more neuro, not to fail, not even close most of the time. I mean, you might be a 3 to fail. You're moving the bar quickly, you're moving heavier weights, but it's a slow game. And over time, though, we'll gain muscle mass, but it's going to be a better quality muscle mass for producing better forces at lower masses. Pennation angles will be more favorable. You have the neuro component in place. When you do powerful things, then you've been training that way. It's not rocket surgery in a lot of ways. We just try to make it too complex sometimes. Just train for what you need and adjust your training accordingly. The good news, if you're a newbie or a young athlete, young in age particularly, but certainly biologically as well, you can train in that mid-range, that 6 to 10, 12 range, and still get both get size and strength. That's the honeymoon period when it doesn't matter what you do. In fact, I would stay in that range just to avoid lifting those heavy loads when you don't have to just yet. But for those of you who've been training for a while, you're like, how do I get stronger? How do I get bigger? You just have to be patient and continue to work in that lower rep range. It doesn't mean there isn't a time to periodize your program to work in the higher rep ranges, but that would probably be more of a focus on building the anaerobic and aerobic machinery, doing work capacity type of stuff early in the phase, bathing your body in growth hormone, preparing the connective tissue for the abuse that it's about to take when you lift heavier things. So I'm not saying abandon those higher or moderate to higher rep sets, but you wouldn't want to focus your whole training attention there. Just like a bodybuilder wouldn't want, maybe they go up into a strength cycle once in a while, but going down, but staying up there is going to be, not a good idea in terms of sustaining volumes in order to drive muscle growth. So I hope that's helpful. I think the debate's interesting, but I don't think it's terribly complicated when you think of it in terms of just what does the athlete need. It's a simple question. The answer is a little bit multifaceted, but the actual concepts are not that complicated. You just have to step back and ask, what do I need? Understanding that muscles adapt to however you train them, however the stimulus is, that's how they will adapt. Pretty simple in that respect, I guess. I hope that's helpful if some of you are kind of debating whether you should get bigger or stronger, or you're a strength coach, you don't know what to do. Strength coaches have been doing this for a long time. I don't know how long I've been doing this now, but simple linearized periodization is not a bad way to do things, even in a moderate to elite, advanced to even an elite athlete, potentially even a block training then is going to be more maybe applicable. But that type of approach is still beneficial in order to prepare the athlete to lift heavier weights over time, understanding that the goal is not to gain mass, but to, in fact, gain more force. All right, I'm talking in circles at this point. I'm just going to stop. I just like this topic. I think it's really interesting. Catch you in the next video.